Good evening. My name is Isabel, and I would like to introduce you to this evening and to welcome you very much on behalf of the Om Foundation Inner Science to our today's program of meeting with teachers, navigating the wisdom path with Ouspensky, Parkin and Robin Bloor. The title of this evening is The Fourth Way and Inner Science. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation between Om and Robin. And I'm also very curious because when Robin was here visiting us at Gut Saunstorf Monastery in June, he already gave us an impressive introduction to the Fourth Way and Gurdjieff's teachings. And there at the end, he already had a first conversation with Om about the essential aspects of the Fourth Way and also about differences between Om's understanding of the Fourth Way and Gurdjieff's understanding of the Fourth Way's teachings. So tonight, on the one hand, can be seen as a continuation of this dialogue. And I'm also particularly curious to learn about the role of the inner science in the Fourth Way. Om, who is an inner scientist, has been teaching his students inner science for many, many years. And before this event, Om wrote to us that the Fourth Way involves a good deal of inner science too. So we will see we will learn about that connection tonight. And maybe we also will get some insights into practical inner techniques to apply to ourselves. For those who do not know Om and Robin, I would like to briefly introduce them. Om is a master of the silent tradition. He unites Western and Eastern streams of wisdom teaching and stands in the lineage of Ramana Maharshi, Papaji and Gangaji. He has been guiding people on their path to awakening for 30 years. And he's also the initiator of the Om Foundation Inner Science, the founder of a mystery school, the Enneallionce School of the Fourth Way, and he also founded the monastery Gut Saunstorf, where we are right now here tonight. Robin is a Gurdjieff expert. He's author of several books on the Fourth Way and leader of the Gurdjieff Society in Austin, Texas, in the United States. He was a disciple of Rena Hans, whom he holds in great honor until today, and who was a direct student of Gurdjieff. He produces a monthly newsletter, The Lost Herald, and organizes a number of online study groups to study Gurdjieff's writings and Gurdjieff's objective science. Well, some words about the evening's proceeding. Those who have joined via Zoom can use the chat function to ask questions. You can put your questions there during the conversation or after being invited to. And then either your question will simply be answered or you will be switched on. For those who are watching on YouTube, you can also spontaneously decide to switch to Zoom. And the instruction to do that you will find in the text below on YouTube. Yes, and now at the beginning I would really like to welcome Robin, who is already connected. Hello, Robin, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
It's a great pleasure to see you here again so soon.
It's a pleasure to be back, actually. It's like I see faces on the screen here that I recognize. That's nice.
Yeah, okay. I'm seeing the Gurdjieff picture on the wall behind you. Yeah, thank you very much for being here tonight. And yes, of course, I'm pleased to welcome Om again. And yeah, until Om has taken his seat, let us be together in stillness for a moment. I wish all of us an insightful evening. And at the end, I would like to ask you to stay for a moment for a little closing statement.
Well, Robin, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Good evening. Well, is it even? What's the time?
Well, you would say midday here, but I'll
Midday.
accept the evening. It's fine.
Okay. Well, this meeting is not planned. I mean, we have no concept really. Everything happens spontaneously. I guess there is one essential question, and around this question, I guess the whole conversation revolves. And the question would be, what is the fourth way? I don't quite, let me say something before, I don't want to give an immediate answer, I just want to say something beforehand. there were some things that Isabel said in her introduction I'm not really I don't really identify with. There are some things I think she must have gotten wrong. Two things, two remarks, okay? First thing, just because Gurdjieff in his teaching had different aspects which I do not teach, this doesn't mean that he had a different understanding. So the pronunciation, Gurdjieff's understanding and my understanding is the wrong pronunciation. This is the first thing. The second thing, was that she said something about inner science, you know? She said like, oh, great parts of the fourth way are in resonance with inner science or something like this, you know? This is also a false understanding. I could say right at the beginning that the fourth way is in itself inner science. So not parts of it are in resonance with inner science and other parts are not, but the fourth way is inner science. I think Gurdjieff also used very often, and you used it also in your introduction, the term objective, right? So if something is objective, or to approach objective wisdom, objective reality, it means that inner science has to be applied. This is my simple statement, just to begin with, you know? So please, do you think we should begin with this big question? What is the fourth way? Or what it isn't?
I think we can do that. The reality of one's understanding of anything comes from one's experience in life. So when I think of myself as a student of the fourth way, I only studied with various people at various points in time. It's not a complete knowledge. It's let's say it's a partial knowledge. But there are some fundamental things that I think are worth understanding. One of the things that Gurdjieff said, and something that has been for me a very powerful idea, is that the external events of your life don't matter. What matters is how you digest them, or how you are able to, in one way or another, experience them. And this seems to me to be one of the pillars of the fourth way.
Yes. I think, you know, what you call, or what he called digestion is what I call part of the process of inner science. I understand the term digestion. I would say that digestion means there has to be some funnel, you know, from the subjective reality. Every human being is living in a subjective reality, to objective inner science. So this the path or the bridge, we could maybe also call it, from this subjective, limited and distorted perception towards what is objective. This bridge, walking along this bridge, I would call, this is what he meant by the process of digestion. This is my words, you know. Maybe you have a different...
I would think that it reflects entirely the meaning that I understand by this. It's like we perhaps use the word digestion in respect of normal food, but this is the digestion of the events that occur to you, which are mainly through impressions.
Mm.
So it's how do you, in one way or another, how do you respond and participate into any event in which you're part of? Because you can respond, using Gurdjieff terminology, you can respond entirely mechanical. You just behave in the way that your associations and your character tends to lead you to behave. Or else you try in some way or other to become active towards what's happening. And in that respect, you're trying to, for example, if you're just talking with a person, you're trying to understand the person as well as your relationship to the event. There are several things going on, and you require more attention in order to be able to do that. And there are various techniques in the fourth way that are really what you would think of as techniques to use in certain situations when you are aware enough to actually be there.
Mm. So let's start with, start with the big question. Maybe you can start with an answer, then I will give an answer. What is the fourth way? And let me just add, and I have an additional question, and why can it not be being taught in public? This is an additional question I would like to talk about later.
Oh, that's good. Okay, well, my understanding of the fourth way, it's not the case that the fourth way, in my opinion, it's not the case that the fourth way is something that Gurdjieff invented. The fourth way, in the way that Gurdjieff described it, is that at various points in time it's necessary to inject real knowledge into those people that seek it. Normally to attempt to create a group of people who are aspirational and moving in the direction of spiritualization. And the times at which that emerges, it's clear to me, for instance, in reading history, that something like that was going on in England at the time of Shakespeare. Something like that was going on in Florence at the time of Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. There were various things that were going on in what we could think of as the Dark Ages in various monasteries that were really unusual. There were various things that were going on in the deserts in the first couple of centuries after Christ that were, based upon inner techniques. And, there's a record of these things, but there's not a very strong record. And normally what's required is someone that really knows to enter into the world and teach it to a number of people. So that's my understanding of the fourth way. I don't know particularly why. I personally follow this path, other than it was the only path I could find that had any meaning for me. And of course, there are many paths you can try to find. So for me, it's meaningful because it's the work in life. Most of these techniques, you don't need to be isolated. You don't need to be in a special kind of group. You can take them into life with you. But of course, it's also taught privately and usually mouth to mouth.
Yes, the remark you made is also a remark you already made in a letter after you had been here to the conference. Something very simple. You said, I don't believe Gurdjieff invented the fourth way. So this is very important to my understanding, because this brings us to the understanding of the fourth way, not linked to Gurdjieff, but as a universal path and a universal understanding of, which is part of what I call the eternal philosophy, eternal wisdom knowledge. So let us start maybe with what I call a negative approach, okay? The negative approach. What does it mean? Well, the negative approach is, first of all, to understand what it's not. So if there is a fourth way, it means that there have to be three other ways. This is important, you see? So there have to be three ways prior to the fourth way. Otherwise, it wouldn't be called the fourth way. In other words, it needs an intimate knowledge, and I'm not talking about intellectual knowledge, but I'm talking about a path that has been experienced. It needs intimate knowledge of the first three ways, their limitations, and their distortions. See, I will write a book with the title of The Fourth Movement. So this, of course, is linked to the fourth way and the universal wisdom of the fourth principle. So this implies the knowledge of three movements that I call the three movements of, in Gurdjieff's words, I would call it the three movements of the machine. So to each one of these three paths, which are prior to the fourth, there is linked a specific pseudo-reality of mind, which I call a specific movement of mind. So this, to my understanding, this is very important. In other words, so if there has to be a transcendence of the first three paths. I have been, for many years, introduced, I have knowledge about the first three paths, and Gurdjieff also has names for these three paths and the three approaches. But I understand that there are different steps towards transcendence. And there is something essentially different between the three first paths and the fourth. The first three, they can be followed at the beginning with the mind. You know, if someone wants to follow, I'm using different terms, for example, you know, Indian terms like, which are linked to these first three paths, like Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Karma Yoga. You know, these are linked to the first three paths. So if someone decides, and which is usually according to his own preferences, not according to his dislikes or obstacles, chooses to walk one of these three ways, it will begin with, you know, with with an intention of the mind. And then every path is beginning with the mind. You know, someone has ideas, the mind, the machine is working, and I'm starting to approach with the mind. The fourth way, though, is, I would call it a transcendent path, and a path that can only be walked with no mind. It cannot be understood. It cannot be understood. People who try to understand the fourth way, for example, and they try to read Gurdjieff's literature, and after having read a whole book, even such an excellent book, which is excellently structured, like Ouspensky's, not the fourth way, but, you know, In Search of the Miraculous. After reading this book, still the mind hasn't understood what is the fourth way. I mean, you know, I can understand, yes, there are many different techniques and things, but what is the fourth way? It remains unclear to the mind. This is because the mind has no capacity to understand and to approach really the essence of the fourth way. I would, let me finish this. I would differentiate, you know, four states or four phases towards transcendence, okay? When you start with the mind, the first phase I would call identification. The second phase I would call integration. Like, integration is a conscious, a new and conscious form of identification. The third phase I would call disidentification. Here it becomes negative. And the fourth phase then I would call transcendence. So these are like phases I would differentiate towards transcendence, you see. And then transcendence is the happening of the unknown. That's why Gurdjieff remains so vague, you know. Whenever somebody tries to grasp a concrete understanding of what the fourth way is, or what about the schools of the fourth way, it remains all, to the listener, to the disciple, remains all very, nobody can grasp it, you know, what this is, and what these schools actually teach. This is because the fourth way is the integration and the transcendence of the first three. So the integration and the transcendence of the first three can only happen if somebody has an intimate knowledge about the first three and has gained this knowledge through finalizing these three paths. I know this is not, these words are my words and they're different to what Gurdjieff says, but it's universal knowledge. It's not Gurdjieff's path. He was just one master who transmitted this universal knowledge.
So I would agree with the direction in which you're going. I mean, the ways that I would understand the first three paths is the first one focuses primarily on the moving center, and there are many different things. The way of the fakir is one thing that Gurdjieff describes, where people will gain mastery over the body by adopting particular postures for hours and hours. But also some of the martial arts are really just ways of the moving center, and a certain kind of capability can be acquired in that way. The second way, which is really the way of the emotional center, again, the whole of that activity, and mostly that's examples of that, activities in monasterial situations, where really prayer is one of the major activities, and just a focus on the attempt to experience positive emotions. And that's, that's taking the emotions to a situation that they're not normally in. And then the third way is the way of the intellect. But I think, you've made a very useful distinction, because we live in an age where the intellect, the normal intellect, is treated as though it was some kind of God. Well, in actual fact, it's really just a thinking mechanism. And you really can't go very far with the intellect. If the intellect isn't accompanied by certain kinds of emotional perceptions, then it is actually incredibly limited, because it's almost definable as a mathematical operation. And the thinking center doesn't bear much relation to the reality that you actually experience. It's a way of modeling reality, which is why a thinking center is behind, all sorts of inventions and things like that. But it's because they're modeling reality. It's not because they're experiencing reality. So, I would define the movement into the fourth way is to actually master all of these three different areas of oneself, to make them functions that serve you, and nothing more.
Yes?
I was just going to say, and that takes you to the point where you can transcend them.
Mm. The mastery of the first three realms, which are linked to the first three bodies and the first three brains of the human being. But this is a very complex matter, because these three brains in an ordinary human being do not function in an appropriate way. They are not free. I'm using the term, that they are possessed. So understanding is this: the machine, using Gurdjieff's term, is possessing the three brains. It's a false understanding that the thinking mind, which is a harmless term I use, but the machine is much more radical. The machine has not only distorted the thinking center. This is what some people believe, that the machine is located in the head. This is a false understanding, it's limited. The machine has been possessing all the three centers. So the first three paths are it's already, I wanted to say, it's already a big challenge to free the access through one of the first three paths, and like this, being able then to integrate and to disidentify and to transcend. Because the fakir, for example, as the Gurdjieff's term for the man that has to overcome his primitive physical nature. This is already a great challenge. It's easily said, as you know, people identify with the body, but I know of very, very few people, very, very few people I have met in 30 years of teaching that have mastered the identification with the physical body. Very few people.
There are exercises. One of the things that in the Gurdjieff group that I was part of, but in other Gurdjieff groups, one of the things that's frequently done is to just disturb the habits of the body. So if, for instance, you're a person that smokes cigarettes, then a good thing to do is to reduce the number of cigarettes you smoke to maybe 1 or 2. So that you're no longer at the mercy of when the body feels like a cigarette. You're now in a situation where you're commanding it. To give it up completely is a lot easier, but to do that, and you can do the same with food. It's like everybody has a pattern of eating which is based upon, I don't know, however way they live. But one of the very powerful exercises that the Sufis give is to only eat half. You know, and this is an interesting exercise, because to not eat at all is much easier than to only eat half. And all of this is just, in one way or another, trying to gain mastery over a specific aspect. But these are interesting aspects in the sense that smoking is part of the breathing cycle. So it's interesting because there are very little ways that you can interfere with breathing that are easy to execute. And the other is the eating cycle. And again, there are very few ways that you can interfere with the eating cycle. You can do other things. It's like a person that is inherently not athletic, if they just do an awful lot of exercise, that will already be work, because there's part of them that doesn't want to do it. So, and those are simple things. They're not complicated things, but they're also difficult things.
Yes. You know, I've been introduced into the teachings of the Enneagram, and I think, you know, what Naranjo and Ichazo, you might know these names, what they have transmitted is far beyond what is known of Gurdjieff's teachings. It is much more precise, much more differentiated, and much more complex, what they have transmitted. And in these, when you understand really to read the symbol and the contents of this symbol, then you find, you know, that the way of the fakir is a way that a certain type of human being has to go through, whereas other types you know. Other types, in the Enneagram teachings, we call them, you know, they have fixation. The machine is fixated on a different level, not on the same level. So if the machine is fixated on the heart level, then these physical exercises do not have the same meaning for this person than for those people who have what we would say in the Enneagram teachings, a fixation in the first brain, you see, who have to, they are forced to go the first way. This is, we could say, this is their karma. They cannot really, in reality, choose, oh, do I choose the first, the second, or the third way? It depends on the type of this human being. And actually, there are only 3 types. These 3 types refer to one of the first 3 paths. So if you have a fixation in the thinking mind, in the mental center, then you have to walk the path of the yogi. And these physical exercises also, they do not have the same meaning for you, you see. This is a very important. So if someone from the first way eats, for example, you gave this example, you know, food, physical food to the body, there is a different tension and a different weight on this happening compared to when the yogi eats. You know, the yogi might say, well, for me it doesn't matter, I just eat, well, I could eat double and I could drink a glass of alcohol, it doesn't matter. But if someone on the first way drinks only a glass of wine, this could have a very negative effect because it is part of the friction of this immense friction, this fight to overcome physical seeming needs and desires. You see, so I think this is a very important knowledge to understand that these techniques, also Gurdjieff talks about, they do not have the same meaning to every human being. They have a specific meaning to this human being that walks either, let's say, the first way of the fakir, second way, you know, way of the monk, third way of the yogi. So this is something I can also share from own experience, you see, because I never had a fixation in the first brain. So I never, ever experienced, you know, in the process of liberation, that whatever I ate, yes, of course, I mean, if, you know, but I didn't have tendencies to overeat. I mean, you know, it was just not my issue. I was not interested in that, you see. So, yes, I eat something, or I don't eat, you know, it's just happening. It's not, there is no tension on this happening, you see. Or smoking a cigarette or not smoking a cigarette, you know. You see what I'm pointing to? We have to differentiate and we have to coordinate these techniques to seekers who walk one of the first 3 paths, and they cannot decide which one they want to use. It's destined.
This particular, because you can also in various other ways create, let's say, perspectives about the activity involved in trying to follow the fourth way. But the reality is that people actually are individuals. The reality is that everybody comes with their own karma, is the way that I always think about it. And their work is always oriented towards that karma. And yes, of course, if the karma is physical, then the work will be physical.
Mm.
If the karma is intellectual, then it'll be intellectual. If it's emotional, it will be emotional. So I agree with the general thrust of what you're saying. The situation arises, I guess, for people that become interested in any spiritual path, that there's a learning process where they come in contact with information and they discover information that they value and they absorb that into themselves. And this is what I think Gurdjieff described it as the exoteric circle. It's a circle of people who are interested, but they don't know much at all. And they haven't really got to a point where an individual path becomes at all clear, but they are attracted.
Is that what we would call half-heartedness?
Yes.
Yes. Well, most people are like that, you know. Even spiritual seekers, I mean, there is very, very, very few who are so interested that I would give the term full-heartedness. Yes, who belong to the esoteric circle. Did you still wanted to share something, or?
Well, I think I had little more to say, but I think the first realization for me and probably for most people that are attracted by the fourth way and whatever its manifestations are, it's simply coming to the realization that you are indeed mechanical, that your life is indeed based upon just mechanical behavior in respect of outside impressions, really. And that's, I think, what starts people. If you don't make that realization, then you might just as well be joining a golf club or something.
Well, yes. Well, most people prefer the golf club. Just came back from Scotland, you know, where golf has a very important role. I think, you know, the insight into the identification with I am a machine is a kind of humiliation that people do not want to take completely. It is a humiliation for the ego to realize, you know, that this ego is more or less a synonym for the machine, isn't it? So it's a humiliation to realize that this ego is simply a mechanical entity that consists in forms of thinking, feeling, and sensing that do not arise from a deep source within, but they simply come from elsewhere. And an ordinary human being is just so imitative that there is no real hindrance in this process of, you know, imitation of thinking forms, feeling forms, and also outer forms of behavior that have been collected from the story of mankind. I think, when I look into my story, I had two big advantages. One was I was completely, I would say, I was absolutely rebellious against everything. I mean, you cannot imagine this dimension of, rebellion against authority. But we're not just talking about certain authorities or the father or whatever, but I was absolute rebellious against everything, finally against the whole world. So this is actually the mother soil for inner science. You need a complete inner state of inner rejection of everything. In some people, this just leads to complete depression and death. In my case, this happened almost also. Because, of course, this goes along with depression and world negation. But for some reason of grace, I walked over the bridge, okay? So I think this is a very important condition. Not accepting anything as final reality. I always knew that there was something, that something was wrong with the whole world and the way I perceived it. I always knew that there was something wrong, that this was a kind of theater and I was kind of in the wrong scene or something like this, So I wanted to understand, I wanted to realize what is behind all of this. But I was not happy, I was absolutely unhappy being in the world.
I think that's characteristic of a lot of people who take a spiritual path. I think the difficulty, which is, let's say, underestimated by a lot of people that try to follow paths like this, is that the ego doesn't want to be humiliated. The ego identifies very strongly with various things that occur, assuming that it in some way or other created all. And so it's this inner God of self-love that has to be sacrificed. And it actually has to be sacrificed. There is no, in my experience, there is no compromise here.
Are you talking about false self-love? I didn't quite get it. Yes.
Yeah, it's false self-love. It's
yes.
The way it's vanity, it's pride in the normal human sense. It's all of that. It's false self-love. But it feels very real to the ego. And therefore, the ability to oppose that is already something unusual.
So, this resistance towards humiliation, we could also call it the basic pride in the shadow of every ego mind. This is, yes, you also said this, it's a big obstacle. And also one of the reasons why also Gurdjieff stated that you do need an external guru. If you do not have a guru, the mind will not voluntarily move into self-humiliation in a transcendental way. I mean, self-humiliation, which is occurring through the superego, is not the same thing. The true humiliation we're talking about is, yes, we defined it as the realization that my whole seeming being, my subjective being, is an accumulation, came from somewhere, and it is a completely mechanical happening. It has nothing fresh. It is not connected to the source, and it does not come from myself. So whatever I call myself is not coming from myself. I mean, this is a humiliation. This is actually incredible, you know, to realize this in a radical way. So, yes.
I would agree with you that you need, well, you can't do this alone. You need somebody that has the wisdom to understand the truth about the human situation, who can, in one way or another, help you. But you have to do it yourself. Help is help, but you have to do it yourself.
Even Ouspensky, who was a very bright being, failed. Because you described the situation when you were here in Saunstorf. He failed because he was not willing to take the humiliation. Gurdjieff guided him to this point. And then there's always a moment when this humiliation happens and the student cannot plan or predict or prepare for this situation. It happens, and this is the moment where people leave the guru because they're not willing to take it. And Ouspensky was also not willing to take it.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think there is at some point in time in the relationship between the master and the pupil, the master has to lead the pupil to the point of that, and see if they can swim in those waters. Because I don't think the master can even necessarily know. I don't think Gurdjieff knew that Ouspensky would not be able to take the humiliation. There's many reasons why you would think, because if you become familiar with Ouspensky, why you'd think he would be able to. He was an intellectually very honest man. He was a very intelligent man. So he had lots of, let's say, capability that ought to have, in some way or other, made his personal humiliation possible. But as it turns out, as far as we know, he rejected it.
The master does not even have an intention to humiliate the disciple. This is just the way, the perspective, the mind of the disciple sees it. The master does not even have the intention, but it is happening, because what is finally humiliating to the mind is simply the truth in all its different aspects. I mean, the truth is always a humiliation for the one who pretended to be in truth and has to realize that his pretension of truth is untruth. You know, I wanted to go back maybe to just say a few things about how, you know, how people come through the entrance gate of the first three ways and then get to the end of this way and realize that this is a limitation. So we have agreed that the first three ways, people have to enter through one of these three ways. And it is not their free choice. They have, according to their hidden tendencies, they have to meet their challenges on this realm. So when they have succeeded in, you know, penetrating all the distortions and what in Enneagram teachings we call the fixation that happened on this level, then this form, the physical in the first way, becomes or enters into a more free and flowing state, which is not anymore possessed by the machine. So the moving center leads to free actions, for example. But of course, this is still a very limited path and does not, absolutely not include and integrate the approaches of the second and the third way. So, in other words, the fourth way, before the fourth way or the transcendence of the first three can happen, the first three ways have to be approached to the end. Then what I call the great circle is in motion. The great circle is the circle of the three brains of human beings. And then when the great circle is in motion, then the great transcendence is possible. But definitely, we cannot say that walking one of these first three ways is enough. I'm just giving this very concrete example. You know, when it is known also in other traditions that when people walk the path of wisdom and knowledge without walking the path of love, then it is a classical distortion that happens, is that these people can become very arrogant because they believe that they know something, but the knowledge can be maybe just again possessed by the machine, and they don't realize this. So in other words, knowledge without love is dangerous, and on the other hand, love without knowledge is limited. So this is just an example, you know, which refers to these two different approaches.
And the normal approach in the group that I was part of, I guess is the thing to say, was that the knowledge could only be retained by using it, and by using it practically in a way that you could understand the implication of the knowledge. It's very easy to buy some books and learn, you know, the various what one might call techniques of inner considering, of keeping accounts, of normal identification, and so on and so forth. Not expressing negative emotion. There's lots of things that you can, if you want, pick up and learn about and do nothing about. You won't know what they're actually, you won't even know what the knowledge is, because you will never have actually given birth to it in yourself, and you will not have the understanding from it. And because we live in an age that tends to be intellectual, the emotional part is far more important, because my experience is that most people, that's what they lack. Their intellectual side may not be perfect, but the emotional side is normally much more in need of education.
Well, actually, it seems so normal to most people, but looked at this from a perspective of the fourth way, a perspective of a transcendent mind, it is really a mystery, that a person can seemingly have intellectual knowledge without having knowledge. I mean, this is, the closer we look at this situation, the more absurd it becomes, because it's actually very strange, isn't it? A person knows something, has accumulated, for example, a lot of spiritual knowledge by reading books, and yet doesn't know anything. How is it possible to accumulate knowledge? What place is this? Without knowing. This brings us back to the machine. So in other words, the machine is also learning. So when a teacher, for example, is writing a very philosophical, intellectual, complex book, and you find that the context being described is all correct, this does not mean that the author of this book has realized what he is writing about. It can be only hollow intellectual knowledge without the flesh of inner experience. So this is really important to discriminate this. There I would agree with what you said before. We need the second path, which is the path of the heart and the liberation of the emotional center. Because the emotional intelligence is able to read beyond intellectual understanding and to read the gap between intellectual words can only be grasped through through the intelligence of the heart center. This is very important.
It's difficult for a lot of people to understand that. You can explain it, if you like, articulate it in pure intellectual terms. If you have a word like bush and a word like tree, there's an indefined boundary between the two, but the intellect uses those as though they were some kind of absolute definitions. But the emotional part sees all of the gradations from one to the other, and not just with bushes and trees, but with everything. If you can invoke that part can understand fine distinctions that can't be resolved by discourse, can't be resolved by one intellectual argument against another. It can just discern. it can discern points for which there are no words. And so it's the master of the normal intellect, but most people find that a really difficult idea. And they
what exactly?
Oh, the emotional part transcends the intelligence of the intellectual part. They find that difficult because possibly they've never met that idea before.
Let me just take a look at two questions that have come in. Can you see them also?
I'm not sure. I can see one question from Joe. Is that it?
One is from Katrin in the studio.
Okay, I haven't got that.
Okay, you haven't got it. Let me just read it. I'm very touched by this real anarchy. Is it possible to achieve during life if you are not born with? What does it require? Is it possible to achieve during life if you are not born with it? You mean with real anarchy? Well, I had a situation in Darshan yesterday where I explained to a disciple that his whole intention was to get intellectual control on the complete chaos of life. And see, many people, especially people in the third way, and we have many people walking the third way in modern times in Europe and in the United States. They make a great effort in gathering intellectual understanding. And my answer was, what I said was, look, if the whole intention to accumulate knowledge is only to control the system of fear, do you believe, are you so naive to believe that if an intention is a substitute intention of the ego, that from this source true understanding can arise? If it's just a side-tracked movement of the mind, trying to control the total chaos, one has to be quite naive to believe that true understanding can arise from this inner movement. And what I said is that true understanding can only arise from, the surrender to what this mind calls the chaos of life, what the mind can not understand. The mind does not understand what is happening, why is it happening, and when is it happening, and finally nothing. So, yes, most people are not really in their karma. They don't have this force towards real anarchy, but of course we can achieve it during lifetime by removing the obstacles. that are in the way. So, you know, if you have a tendency to be very adaptive and to imitate thought, feeling, and moving and behavior forms that have been taught by other people, that have been thought by other people, that have been felt by other people, and so on, then first you have to ask, well, what is the origin of this happening? You know, why is it happening? And then you will find in your way, in your path, that the source is, of course, that you want to be loved by other people, that you want to be loved by mankind, that you want to be loved by whoever. And this is not anymore about certain specific people. This is about the whole of humanity. And it requires, of course, it requires the total momentum of aloneness. If someone is able to reject the whole of humanity, you know, this is an immense inner act. Whatever has been thought, whatever has been felt, whatever has been, everything is limited, everything is wrong, everything is fake, everything is just, you know, a theater. This is complete and total rejection. And you know that there are always two entrance gates into anarchy. One is the complete and total rejection. This is the male approach, okay? But there's also a female approach, and this is the complete and total surrender to, it's what I said before, you know, to the chaos. The complete and total surrender to chaos. So this is the female approach. So there are always these two options, you see? I had the other approach. Do you want to add anything towards this question of Katrin?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I want to add just one point that, you know, looms very large in me. It was a big moment in my life when I realized I was alone, completely alone. The reality was that I was alone. Mm-hmm. And all of the people and all of the relationships I identified with were just that. They were just, I don't know, painting on the wall. So I was alone. So you then start to worry about what you take to be true. And there are many things that we take to be true, and there are many things in the sphere of, let's say, politics, let's say religion, let's say science, that we just take to be true. And they're all lies in respect of whether I know those things to be true, because I don't know them. You know, and it's a kind of an interesting thing. And this, I think, this position starts to lead you towards the anarchic position. Mm. Because if there's nothing out there in the outer world, if there's nothing out there that in any way can inform you, then you must go and try and find something that can. And a part of that process is to reject all of the normal things of life. Both sides. It's not like that one political side is right and the other is wrong. Both sides reject it. Just reject everything. So I think that that's necessary, and I think that it's necessary to understand this is not intellectual rejection. It's complete rejection. It's rejection by the heart and rejection by the body. Everything rejects it.
So, complete and total inner anarchy requires aloneness. I absolutely agree with that. So let's because we're already quite late in our time. So let me see this. Let me just read this other question. Can you read that also? There is someone named Joe. Can you read that?
No.
In the chat.
It's my chat isn't agreeing with this, so I have no idea why, but there you go. So you could read it out.
Just a moment. Yes, well, I don't completely understand what he's wanting to say. You want me to read it to you?
Yeah, sure.
I agree that Gurdjieff's material is abstract and diffuse sometimes. Perhaps there is a modular mechanist approach. But there is also infatuation and other identification with ways and models as other forms of escape from personal responsibility.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that's getting at. I will say that one of the things that definitely occurred for me in the line that I pursued was that I began by reading books and then talking to people, but that's always vague. You know, we're not very good at understanding things even when we're quite good, you know, we're just not really that skillful in being able to understand intellectual things. So, you know, already it's vague. We aren't very good at reading, so we will, if we read something, we might remember 20 or 30% of it, but we don't properly formulate it. So you've already got that problem, but there were things that were said to me that had got nothing to do with reading, that just hit me very, very directly. One of the things that was said to me was you really can't change anything about yourself except attitudes. But if you change attitudes, then everything can change. And then there was something else that was said, what you are attracts your life, your being attracts your life. The things that happen to you are what you attract. That was said to me. Neither of those things meant anything to me at the time, but I couldn't stop thinking about them. And the other thing that was said, which was very powerful, but it was said to me directly by my teacher, she said, you know, the work brings results, but you actually have to do it. And that was just that many people in the groups that I encountered, they talk about it, but they don't do it.
This is intellectual understanding, isn't it?
Yes.
They talk about intellectual understanding, but they don't do it, meaning they don't live it, meaning they don't realize it. Well, I think that Joe wants to point also, one makes a remark on guru saviors as other forms of escape from personal responsibility. I don't know whether he has something with gurus or maybe he doesn't know what the guru is, you know. But I don't think that this is really our big issue tonight, the guru and the understanding of the guru. I would like to, because as I say, you know, it's already 1.5 hours. I would like to say something about the non-public. of the teaching, and this is something we find in Gurdjieff's school very much. Well, you could read it also between the lines, you know, that the way he transmitted the schools of the fourth way. He used it, by the way, in plural. He never said this school of the fourth way. He said the schools of the fourth way. So this is a very, very important differentiation. So these schools cannot work in public. Okay, we cannot give open seminars on the fourth way, because, as I said at the beginning, you know, my definition, I call this a negative path. Negative in the sense that it cannot be understood in a positive way. It can only be realized by finally integrating and disidentifying, meaning rejecting the limitations of the first three approaches. So it is not a way where mind has anything to offer. The mind is at its end. So it is negative. And it is even dangerous to teach the fourth way in public. Of course, you know, you were mentioning at the beginning, you were giving examples of Gurdjieff. We can read techniques or certain aspects that Gurdjieff taught, which I wouldn't call dangerous in public, like, for example, the movements. I would say that, you know, teaching the movements, everybody can be touched, who is practicing this, can be touched in his own limited perspectives, but he will be touched and he will benefit from the movements. But the higher you get into what we called at the beginning, you know, the real anarchy of the destruction of the machine, this is a dangerous thing, you know. It's dangerous because it needs someone who is mentally relatively healthy to, you know, it needs preparation usually. People are not in this state like as Ramana Maharshi was in, you know. One holy being, one of 400 million, is in such a pure and pristine state, you know, where you do not have to work on the different levels of the three approaches. This being is so absolutely transcendent that this is absolutely possible within seconds to, you know, to penetrate every veil of mind and go directly to the question, who am I? This is what happened through Ramana Maharshi, but this is not our reference. It cannot be a reference to seekers of modern times. So anyway, that's the way it is. It's also a question of resonance, you know. I was very active in public. I saw very, very many people in public. And then to end this phase of the teaching, I realized that now to go further, and to transmit deeper teachings, it is not possible any longer to work in public. It is necessary to reduce the work to a limited number of students. And this has happened now for the last 15 years that I've been retreating from the public and no more interest in, giving teachings that are being received in an intellectual way. How is it in your groups? They are also not public, but how closed are these groups actually? The Gurdjieff groups that you work with.
I have some public stuff. The view that I take more than anything else is that the stuff that I do in public is only to provide people with information, perhaps to do it in a way that they remember it, but only to do that. I have two private groups. One is a group of people who were, all of whom were taught by someone who was taught by Gurdjieff. And in Austin, we meet about once a month. And then I personally lead a group on Sunday evenings, and you have to apply to get into that group. It isn't open to everybody. So I have to understand the people that are in there. It has about 12 people in it. It's not large.
Is there, from your perspective, is there anything that you would, like to end our conversation? Is there anything that you would like to?
Well, I think the point you raised, and that I think is just very important, is that you are alone, and that the sooner that you realize you are alone, then the work can really start, because it's your responsibility. There isn't anybody, there's nobody else to blame, there's nobody else to complain to, there's nothing. It belongs to you. And you take responsibility for it. And that, in my opinion, is the work. But it may also be quite correct in lots of other traditions. But in the work, it is exactly correct.
Some limited understandings believe that there is a contradiction between aloneness and the relation to the Guru. They have not understood. There is absolutely no contradiction, because the relationship with the Guru is the only relationship that reflects aloneness. All other relationships a human being can have in this world do not reflect aloneness. This is very important to understand. There seems to be a contradiction in itself, but the contradiction is only because people do not understand who or what the Guru really is. So, I'm really looking forward. I was in touch with you the other day on Zoom and planning next step of coming together in 2025, actually, end of next year. And I just came back from Great Britain, so I'm just starting to get going again here, and we will plan this happening and plan the next deepening step. And if you have anybody from, the lineage, who knew the second generation after Gurdjieff, and teacher from UK or from other countries. If you contact with anybody, let me know. I'm interested to get together and to come together with you and maybe also somebody else.
Okay, I shall do that. There are very few left. They're all dying now. They got old.
We are in the whole world, the Western world is in a difficult phase, because all the great teachers are dying.
Yep.
And or are leaving. Some of them even do not want to teach because they don't find worthy students. I have had 1 or 2 examples. And it's a dark phase from a spiritual point of view. This is not taking political perspectives into consideration, but from a spiritual, from a much higher and broader perspective, it's a difficult phase. It's a kind of regression we're walking through, and we'll see what happens. But all the great masters that I knew personally have left the body already. Thank you very much for being with me. We are in touch, and
Yes,
we will write, and I will come together with some of my students to plan our next step in, I think, October 25. Thank you very much for being with me.
Well, thank you for.
I will talk to you. Thank you.
Okay.
And thank you everybody for being here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for this evening together. Thanks to Om, and thanks to Robin. Thank you so much for sharing and for the teaching. As Om already announced, we are looking very forward to meeting Robin here again next year. You already heard it. Yeah, and at the end I would like to speak a few words about the Om Foundation Inner Science. Enabling meetings and networking with different spiritual teachers is one important part of the Foundation's work. And this free of charge program, Meeting with Teachers, is one opportunity for such an encounter and exchange. So if you like our work, and if you wish to support the Foundation, we would very much appreciate a donation. Information on how to donate you can find on YouTube and on our website. Yes, and I would already like to announce the next meeting with teachers, the next program. It will be on November 17th, and our guest then will be Swami Dharma Sumiran. He's a Russian mystic and a realized master, and we really appreciate this opportunity to be with this master again, and we hope that you will also join us again. All the recordings from Meeting with Teachers will remain available on YouTube and on the Foundation site so you can watch them again if you missed something or if you like to. And if you would like to get to know the Gut Saunstorf Monastery personally, there are many opportunities. More or less once a month, Om is giving darshan here, and all the information about the events you find on our site. If you like this event, pass the information to your friends. And at the end, yes, I want to say thank you and goodbye to everybody.